Start with the no vote to Scottish independence and the aftermath.
That's right. It looked to have settled everything, the no vote, but there's a big fallout from it. David Cameron announced last Friday that in future Scottish MPs at Westminster would be barred from voting on matters that concerned only England and presumably Wales as well. Now, that has been strongly opposed by Ed Miliband, the Labour leader, with good reason, because if he was deprived of his 40 Scottish MPs, his voting power would be severely depleted. Now, The Guardian reports that David Cameron is facing pressure from his Liberal Democrat coalition colleagues not to enforce this measure. One of them, who happens to be Scottish, Danny Alexander, says that the matters of English votes and further Scottish devolution are separate matters and the Labour should be consulted on any change. Now, Ed Miliband is also facing pressure from his own party to drop opposition to the move. The Independent reports that many Labour MPs from the north of England are worried that there might be a backlash against them at next year's election, where they might be seen as belonging to a party that doesn't really care about England. Former Government Minister Kate Hoey is one of those who's saying that Labour should go along with Cameron's move. Now, the right-wing Daily Telegraph really doesn't see the fuss at all. It's criticising Miliband for reacting to Cameron's announcement like, quote, a scalded cat. It dismisses the Labour leader's call for a constitutional convention to deal with the matter. English votes for English laws, it says, is a fairly straightforward reform. Mayor of London Boris Johnson agrees. The headline of his opinion piece in the Telegraph captures the spirit of the man very well. It says, it would be bonkers to rewrite the Constitution overnight. He recalls watching in fury as an opposition MP 10 years ago as Scottish Labour MPs, quote, imposed tuition fees on English students. Now, that's something, interestingly, that the Tory government hasn't since repealed. He says if we give new powers to Scotland, it's only fair we give them to England too, and no big constitutional shake-up is required for that.
All right, let's move on to this giant green march that's been taking place across the world ahead of this week's UN summit in New York.
That's right, and the main march was in New York itself, where thousands took to the streets, including former Vice President Al Gore, who has sounded warnings for many years on global warming and climate change. The New York Times reports some alarming news, a 2.3% rise in global greenhouse emissions in the past year. Now, or rather in 2013, though that is slightly below the average growth emissions over the last 10 years. That drop is only really explained by an economic slowdown in China, and the US saw its emissions rise by 2.9% after having dropped for a few years. The Times says this shows that the world is missing its targets to arrest climate change, and that if emissions continue as they are, the Earth could warm by anything between 2 and 6 degrees Celsius over the next century.
Wow. All right, let's move on to Ebola. The Ebola continues to be in the headlines. Unfortunately, it continues to terrify Africa and the rest of the world. Spain has taken back a priest who's contracted the disease.
That's right. Father Manuel Garcia Viejo returned to Spain early this morning, reported in El País. He had got the disease in Sierra Leone, where he was a missionary with the St. John of God order. Another Spanish missionary from the same order had previously died back in Madrid after returning from Liberia. 69-year-old Father Garcia Viejo is being treated at the Carlos III Hospital in Madrid. Now, El País says that the hospital has affirmed that it will not be evacuating wards to deal with the Ebola. It says that it can be perfectly isolated within one particular room. It's not known yet how the priest got the disease, as the hospital he administered in Sierra Leone had not actually reported any cases, but it probably just was from general interaction with the public. His family are also interviewed by El País, and they seem to be rather philosophical and optimistic. They say that, well, as they say, in Spain we have way too many doctors. In Africa, they're really missing quite a few. So obviously there will be quite a big difference in the basic health care that he can get in Spain compared to Sierra Leone.
And finally, let's move on to this story about the 49 Turkish hostages who returned home after 3 months being in the hands of ISIS fighters. Many people, though, are suspicious of the Turkish government.
Yeah, Patrick Coburn in The Independent says that people are suspecting Ankara of cutting a deal with the jihadist group. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is not explaining how the release came about, and Kurds in the north of Syria are accusing Turkey of colluding with ISIS. The Daily Beast also reports accusations of a deal. Erdogan says that no ransom was paid for the hostages, but he did confirm that Turkish intelligence agents did negotiate with ISIS, and several voices in the Turkish media suspect that Turkey might have promised, in exchange for the release, they might have promised not to join any military campaign against the Islamic State organisation.
All right, Oliver Farry, thank you very much for that. And we're going to have a short break now, but don't go away. We'll interview a French politics expert who'll tell us what he thinks about Sarkozy's return.